Hello everyone, Latif here, and you are welcome to Code with Laticotech. In this video, we will be looking at Python functions. So we're going to look at what functions are in Python. Then we look at the syntax. We also look at how to call a function. Then we look at the input function. This is an inbuilt function. Then we look at functions without arguments, and then functions with arguments. Then we look at using the return statement, and we can solve some other problems. A function is a block of organized, reusable code that performs a specific task. Functions provide better modularity and facilitate code reusability. See, it really makes the code so beautiful, easy to extract some code within the function or outside the function. A Python program is made up of many lines of code stored in a file. Now let's take note of this thing here. So we have many lines of code within what you call it, a file, and now it is natural to have a way to divide the lines of code up into sensible subparts. So these codes can be divided into sensible subparts, and these are called functions. So to divide multiple lines of code into subparts, you can use what we call functions to do that. Now almost all the code you work with in Python is inside a function. Now functions in Python are defined using the block keyword def, and it's followed with the function's name as the block's name. Let's look at the syntax. Okay, so this is how the syntax is. You type the def, the function name, and your arguments, and come here. So like we said, there are some that can have the argument, others don't have the argument. Okay, and then you have the function body and the return, and under that you have the call function. Okay, so let's quickly look at the syntax. So let me just create a new file here, and then click on Python. I'll just call it Python syntax. Alright, so let me zoom that in. Put my comment, Python syntax. So this is how it is. You define a function, so you give the name, let's say function name, and you come here and you put parameters. I'm going to use z parameter. Okay, let me just use para. That's the name, or just it's okay. Parameters. It can be 2. You can have 2 parameters like this, or more than 2. So I'm just writing these things to show that they are our parameters. Then you use a colon to stop that over there. Then you come here and put your series of code. It could be adding, so let's say adding parameters, and that will be the first parameter plus the second parameter. So this is how it looks like. So you've defined the function, you've given the name of the function, and you then put your parameters here. Your parameters are like variables. Okay, they are variables that you declare inside this bracket, and now you come in to put your code block. So here we are dealing with adding numbers. It can be subtraction, multiplication, power of a number, whatever you have, you can put it within this. Now the next syntax is the return. Now what the return does is it returns the operation that is within this place. So you can put the adding parameters. Then anytime you are done with this, you need to call your function. So to call your function, so you can, let me see, func. I'm just putting a new variable here. I'll call it func equal. Then I'm calling it. To call it, you have to write the name of your function. Then put your parameters inside. So here you can type two numbers that will replace these things, so that when you are adding, it will work for you. Okay, or you can put the parameters, you can put their names inside. In this case, if you are going to put the same parameters, put their names here, like parameters, comma, argument. And take note, this is just variables. I can replace this with x and this one with y, and the same thing x, y, the same thing here. I'm just using the words here just for the for understanding. So I can just put some numbers here, 6 and then 8. So 6 represents parameters, 8 represents argument. So I can also print the func. See, I've declared this name here is a variable. So let me be sure if, okay, so it's a variable. So let me just run this and then we look at it and then we'll explain it further. So just click on run again, and I'm selecting this file is Python syntax. So you can see the result giving us 14. So back to this and I'll explain it furthermore. Remember, whenever you are, what we did in operators, when you are using global variable, in variables rather, we declare the global variable outside the function. So if there is a variable that is going to be declared outside the function, you have to make sure that it is declared before you now define the function, else the function will not recognize it. But here we're not dealing with that, so that can come here. That's one syntax of the function. But when you come to the main syntax of the function, you have your definition, you've given a name to the function, then you can put parameters here, and some don't have parameters. We'll look at that one very soon. And now you are given an operation here. This is what you want to do. Then you come here and return. So the return statement is supposed to return what you are doing, the operation here. So it is doing this. So this one records whatever this has to do. But when we are done, we go back and call the parameters by using the function name. So here I've just declared a variable because I want to print that variable here to indicate that I'm looking for this one. Okay, and this one is also calling the things that are supposed to be here, and those ones which are the variables are also supposed to be here. Okay, so when we do that, we get our value. Okay, so this is how to call, this is the syntax of Python. Let's look at the next thing. Now we will be creating some projects within this function, so I'm just going to introduce you to the inbuilt input function here. Now in a variable, value can be stored in two ways. It can either be declared in a variable within the program or can be accepted from the user. So I can just declare a variable and just say maybe num1 equals to 2. Or I can also accept, let the user put any number at all the user wants to do. And that is the use of the input function here. Okay, so it can either be declared in a variable with the program, within the program, or can be accepted from the user. Now to fetch an input function from the user, the input function is used. So we're going to look at that. This is how the syntax is. So you go to the input, then you ask the user to input it here, then you now come in and whatever you've asked the user to input here, so you can get them here and add them. So let's look at the example here. So this is how you put it. So let's go back and let me just create a file. I'll call it input function. And zoom that. So we're dealing with input function. So let's get some examples. Okay, so here I can just say num1 equals, now we have int and float. Take note, anytime you are creating a program and you want to accept data from the user, you need to know what kind of data, what kind of value the user has to input. Do you want the user to input decimals or integers? So if you want the person to input integers, then you don't have to use a float. If you use a float, what do you call it, the person can input decimals. So usually we use the int to accept numbers without decimals. But preferably, if you don't have any preference as to decimals or integers, the best one to use is float. So if a person enters a decimal, it works. And if you use float also and the person enter integer, it works. So integer works for both float works for both integer and float and decimal itself. So I'm just going to use float throughout. Float input. Enter read 1. Then I go in num2 equals, so float. Sorry, so we are leaving something out here. Let me just correct that one here. We have to open another bracket and put the input there. Remember, we've opened one bracket. First one is a float, which will require the kind of number to be inputted. Then you put the input. The input is what will accept it, and now you put your message inside. Okay, now remember we've opened one bracket and then there's a second one here, so therefore if you are closing, we close with double brackets. So the same thing comes here, input, then enter read 2. So I like to always leave a space here. That makes it easier for the user to type without to type and then seeing where to type the value. Okay, now we can now say so since we are dealing with input, we can say declare another function called maybe result. We go out here and say num1 plus num2. So we are adding those ones and we can print. We can put a statement. I'm just going to do something here. What do you call it? Formatted string. So using the formatted string, I can just say the result of, then I put num1, okay, and num2 is, then I come here, put a comma and put result. So this is how, so to make it readable. So let's run this one. So we'll go to run again, and then we'll take input function. So you see enter read 1. Remember, I made mention of the space that I have here, and that is why when I click, there is a space before the user entering the number. So I can say 4.5. Read 2, I can say 0.256. And now let's go. So it says the result of 4.5 and 0.256 is, then this is the result here. So this is how to use the input function. Okay, so that is it. Now another way of doing the input function using what do you call it, strings. Since we've done strings in our previous lesson, you can say first, okay, so using strings, we did this one, so you can say first name equal input. So here we are not dealing with integer or float, since we are going to deal with a string. So we just say input, then you just put the enter your first name, and then we also go to last name equal input, enter your last name. So you have the two here. Then now we can put a spacer. We can put a space between them. So I just put a spacer and put a space between them. Then I come in here and now full name equal first name plus the space between them, that's the spacer, plus last name. So we are putting this one just to give a space between the names, and now let's print it. Let's use what do you call it? We can just say print full name. So you can say your full name is, then you put a comma and put full name. Right, so let's run the code again. So let's put first number 0.8, let's put 4, and this is, now we're going to the next line, the set of code here. It says put first name and then last name. So it says your full name is John Doe. So this is the use of the input function. Alright, so moving on. Now we are going to look at how to call a function. Now some functions contain arguments or parameters, whilst others don't. Now we are going to consider the first part, which is functions without parameters and how we can call it. So let's go back to our code. So we create a file and call it functions without parameters. So let's zoom that out, and then so we're dealing with functions without parameters. So to do this without parameters, we can define our function first. So I can just say def salutations, and this one there are no parameters, so I just close it this way. Okay, and then I can just put my print argument here, print what do you call it, I am a let me say software engineer. So then we go down here. Now if there are no parameters, there's no need to use the return function. So what you do, just to call the function back, so you can back tab it and just call the function here. Just call the function. Okay, and so we can run this one too. Let's run it, run and run again. We are running, what are we running? Let's go run and run again. We are running functions without parameters. Yes, this one. So functions with parameters. So it should have been functions without parameters. That is what we are running. So I hope that is function with parameters, functions without. I don't know why I'm not seeing it. Functions without, that's it. Yeah. And I think I had some files that were created on that system, and it was giving me the wrong file to pick. So I can see here I'm a software engineer. So this file that I was selecting, these files do not exist. Function with, it doesn't exist. I think I created some files on it already earlier on. All right, so moving on. So this is how to call functions without parameters. Okay, very simple. So you have the function name and your block of code within the function, and you can have it here. You can even print something outside the function. Are you getting it? Hello outside function. Let's run this one again. So this is within the function and this is outside the function. Okay, right. So let's look at how to call functions with parameters. Okay, so we're going to look at them. This is how the syntax looks like. So we're looking at example of this one. So for instance, if we have add numbers num1, num2, and then sum num1 plus num2, then we print the sum is this. Then to call it, we just call the name of the function here and we'll put the parameters, the numbers that we want to. Okay, so we'll be doing two things here. We can allow the user to input the data or without the data. Now there are two ways of calling the function here. Okay, now let's quickly look at here. Now here in the above example, we have created a function named add numbers with arguments or parameters num1 and num2. Here add numbers 5, 4 specifies that arguments num1 and num2 will get values 5 and 4 respectively. So 5 for num1 and 4 for num2. Now we can also call the function by mentioning the argument name as this way. So when we are calling, look at this, how we did here. We can just go there and just say add number, then we go on num1 equal 5, num2 equal what do you call it, 4. This is called keyword argument or named argument. So from here I can just go here and just do it that way. Num1 equal that, num2 equal that. So when I get here, I will not put this one, I just call the function. So let's look at how this one works. So let's create a file, and we have what do you call it, functions with parameters. So let's zoom that one too. So we are dealing with functions with parameters. So let's say def add numbers. So I can have num1 here. Let me use x, y. So I'm adding what do you call it? Let me just say total numbers. I'm getting the total, so it will be x plus y. So when you do this way, all you need is, instead of looking for a return statement like we said earlier on, we are just going to print, you can just print the, let me quote it, the total is, so let me put the total here, total numbers. Now in this case, we need to call the function. So the function name is add numbers. And inside we can put some values there. So here 5 represents x, or x represents 5 here, and then the same thing 6 represents y here. So let's run and run again. So functions with parameters, okay, so we have 11 here. Okay, now remember we said we have another method called the keyword argument or named argument. In this case, we can, let me just copy this code here and create a different function. Let me just comment here, keyword argument. Now in this case, let me just change the names to look a bit different from the first one. Add number. X, I can just assign the value to X. Let me give it 5 or any number at all. And Y, I can give it, but when I come here, I just call the function. I don't need to indicate the values here. So here, the name of the function is add number. Okay, so print total. Okay, so in this total number, so let's run this one, you see. So you see 11 and this one is 50. So there are different ways here. You can decide to just declare put the parameters without their values assigned to them. Then when you come down here, you are calling that function, then you can put their parameters here. Or you can do the keyword arguments, you just assign them to their values, and then when you come down here, you don't call them because they are already given assignment. They are already assigned at the top over there. Okay. All right. Let's try and print something using the input here. You can also allow the user to input data where you can easily, instead of putting the numbers here, you can just put the inputs from the user. So let me say m equal, or so let me just comment this one, receiving parameters from user. So let's say parameter 1 equals int, we can use floats, so any number the user puts, it doesn't matter. Input, enter first parameter. In this case, we are receiving numbers, and we'll just call this one parameter 2 equals also float, input, here we go, enter second parameter. So here we are allowing the user to input. We already looked at the input function. So this is our first variable and our second variable. Now remember, these variables are global, so declaring global variables. Then when we come here, we now define the function. So defining function. Now remember, these variables are global, and even though they are global, the first two functions cannot use these global variables because if you look at the flow of control, when Python is running, it runs the top part and then to the down part of the code. So it will not see these ones, so they cannot be called in these top variable functions here. So we can only get it in this function that we are going to define. Def add parameters. So I call it parameter 1, parameter 2. So parameter 1, parameter 2 will be inside this place. So let's say total para equal, remember variables, any name style you want to name that will assist you to know what you are doing, then you can name it. So I'm just calling it total para. So I can just call it parameter 1 plus parameter 2. Remember, it doesn't have to be addition operator, it can be subtraction, multiplication, or the modulo, or the floor equation. Any of them you can use here. So now I'm going to print the total para. So the total parameters is, so then we put it here, total para here. Right, so now it's time to call the function. So we just call it by add parameters, because this is the name of the function, add parameters. So here we are not going to put the values here, because this time around we are receiving values from the user, and the values are parameter 1 and parameter 2. So instead of putting the values, we'll write the parameter 1, comma, parameter 2, this way. So we are receiving this from the user. So let's rerun this program again. So parameter 1, let me make 45, parameter 2, let's make it 68, and there we go. So it has added that for me. Now You can see that it is 113.0 because I asked the user to input anything that is in the form of a float. So if the user decides to put decimals, it will work for me. If it is integer, it will also work for me. So this is another way of using the function by receiving input from the user. Right, moving on. Let's go and see what we have next. So we are now going to the return statement. A Python function may or may not return a value. Okay, it may or may not return a value. Okay, the return is about returning operations within a function. So we'll be looking at the syntax and then how it works. If we want our function to return some values to a function call, we use the return statement. So we can call, instead of printing here, we can call the function by using, by using the return statement. For example, def add numbers, return sum. So maybe within the block of code we have sum equals to the numbers working. Here we are returning the variable sum to the function call. Okay, so we are returning it to the function call. Okay, the return statement also denotes that the function has ended. Any code after the return is not executed. Let's look at some examples. Okay, so back to our code editor, and we create a new file called return statement. Let me zoom that also, and we are dealing with return statement. Right, so let's get an example. Def find square. We want to find the square of a number. Okay, a square of a number. And the square of a number, to get the square of a number, not the square root but the square of a number, it is what do you call it, the number multiplied by itself. So I can just put a variable. In this case the parameter is just 1, since this program requires just one value. Here is like, if I see the square of 4, it means that, the square of 2, it means 2 raised to the power 3. Okay, so what I want is just the square of a number. Let's say 4. Let me comment that one. If I want the square of 4, then it will be 4 square. That means 4 raised to the power 2, and that also means 4 times 4. Are you getting it? So since 4 is multiplying by itself, I can just declare only one parameter here, and because it's the same value, so I will now come here and say result equal num multiplied by num. Okay, now when do we use the return? The return comes here and it returns the result. So when we use the return, we are talking about returning the result. So from the previous ones here, let's just go back to the previous code. Here, when I come here, total numbers equal x plus 4. If I want to use the return statement, I just click here and then type return total numbers here. This is where you can put a return statement. Okay, let's go back to our main code. So now after doing the return, we need to now call the function. Okay, so this was for the return statement. Now we're going to call the function. So to call the function, in this case, if you want to call the function, you can declare another variable so that in the end we will see the results of the function. Right now I can just write the function. The function name is find square. Okay, and inside the function I will put the parameter, so I'm just going to get the square of 6, and that will be 6 times 6, which is 36. Now when I do this, and let's run it, we'll come back to this code, because if I run, I'm going to look for return statement. So there's no error, but we are not seeing any square of the 6, which is supposed to be 36. That is because we have not printed our call. We need to print to see our call. So to do this, the best way to do is that let's declare a variable here. Okay, let me just call that one square and equate it to this function. So in this case, I can now print the variable here. Okay, so without this one, and I run it, we are not going to see anything because we have not called it. To see something, you need to display by using print. So what we do is to just use a variable here, just any variable that you can declare, and now you can print that variable, so that if this one runs and there's no, because this shows that there is no error, but we want to see the actual number being multiplied by itself, so we use this one, we print it out. So let's run this, and this gives us 36. Okay, then someone will say, well, why don't we just type print find square? Okay, let's try that out and you see. So I'll take this out and then just type print find square. You can do that by, if you want to do that, you can get rid of this and put the parameter inside. Okay, you can just go direct to print find square and then you put the parameter inside there, so it will just calculate it for you. But when you come here and you declare the parameter, which is find square, and you put the parameter inside, and you come here to just call find square, let's right click that, you see that it is giving us an error. Okay, so we are getting some, it is, even though it's not error, but function find square at this place. Okay, so the best way, there are two ways of doing that. You can just do this, put a variable equated to this, and when you come here, you are printing that variable. That's one way. Another way is you just print find square and put the value that you want to print out. So let me change this one to another number. So we were getting this one here and that one. So let's do, so this is 36, this is 64. So these are the two ways of calling the function and printing it. So the return statement has returned the what you call the operation here. Okay, it has returned the processing that is going to come here, which is add and multiplying it by itself. Okay, so it is giving it to the what you call the function, the call function, and then it will print it out for you. Right. So let's see if we can get another example. So we are going to now look at more examples, but this one we're going to look at the last part, which is solving more problems under the return statement. So we're just going to look at that one. Right, so let's try to calculate the area of a circle. Okay, calculating area of a circle. Now the formula is, the area is equivalent to what do you call it? I just write this as pi multiplied by r to the power 2. So say pi r squared. Okay, so we're going to look at how to do that one. Now let's quickly combine the input function. So let's put input, let's say radius. The only thing we are requiring from the user is the radius. Okay, so we say radius float input, enter the radius of the circle. Then we define our what do you call it? So area, or function area circle. Okay. So we can now come in and we can add. Remember, what do you call it? You can store something, especially when the number is a constant number. You can store it within, okay, or we can borrow it from the math function. I'll leave that one when we get to Python math functions. We'll be doing more on that one, but here we just want to declare another one here. Let's call it pi equal 3.14. I'm just declaring this one as a static number, so it's either I receive from the user, or I can just put a static or constant number there. So let's put here radius, and we come here to do our calculation. So area is equals to pi multiplied by the radius, and the radius is raised to the power. So remember, we did exponentiation, so double multiplication and you put the 2 there. So remember, we did exponentiation here, so it is the pi r squared. Pi times r raised to the power 2, so pi multiplied, and pi is already declared as 3.4 here. Then we now call it, so we can just say return, and that is area. Now we move on to call the function. So we can just say print area circle, and here we are not putting a value like we indicated here by putting the value, because we've asked the user to input something, so we just put radius. That is the argument there, and let's run this one. So it's asking me to put the radius. I'll just put 3.7. So the area is 42.9866. Okay, we can also try to make it look like add some strings to make it more readable. Okay, we can add strings to make it more readable. So when I come here, I can just put a string. The area of the circle is to print this one, and I can even add let me just say a unit, centimeter square. Okay, so let's run this one and see. So let's put 4.5. So you can have it, the area of the circle is this 1 centimeter square. So you can do it like this, making it more readable. Alright, so this is how to use Python functions. If you have any comment, if you have any issues that you encounter during the the programming, you can leave your comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. On this note, I say goodbye, take care and stay safe.